All right. So today we're on Unit 1, Day 3. This is the last day of this unit of new information. And today what we're going to be talking about is levels of organization, is how are organisms um, um, or how are parts of an organism put into levels and and that sort of deal. We'll also be talking about cell specialization and how we have different types of cells as well. This right here might be a little bit longer. These questions, in my opinion, are pretty easy whenever I give them to you, but you sometimes you do have to think through them a little bit, and I'll kind of give you some practice examples of what I mean by that. So very first level is cells. And this is one of the things that you're going to have to be able to do with the levels of organizations. You're going to have to be able to put them in order, and I might say in order from least complex, and the least complex being the cell, to most complex, or I might tell you to ask you to put them in order from most complex to the least. Okay, so the least complex would be the cell. Remember, all organisms are made up of cells. Remember, the cell is the basic unit of life. Um, and then some kinds of organisms, like bacteria, we've already talked about this, are single-celled organisms. And don't forget that cells are also made up of smaller parts called organelles. Now, organelles are not living things by themselves. You know, a nucleus is not a living thing. It can't undergo all the life processes. So the cell is actually the smallest thing that in which it can still undergo all life processes, making energy and all of that. You have the mitochondria, the nucleus, Golgi. Um, you can have centriole, lysosomes, ribosomes, the endoplasmic reticulum, cell membrane, cell wall, and the list goes on. And we'll talk about those in a lot greater detail. But yes, the cell is the most basic unit of life. It's also the least complex when talking about the levels of organization. Tissues, that's the next one up. So whenever I take a group, if you notice this, a tissue is a group of similar cells that work together carrying out a certain job, a specific function. For example, skin cells. Well, if you actually looked at your skin, it kind of reminds me of shingles on a roof. Well, one shingle is not good enough to actually protect the entire roof. So, what we have to do is we have to put a lot of shingles together to actually create your entire roof that is protected. So, skin is the tissue, and it has the function of covering and protecting your body, but it is made up of individual cells. Other kinds of tissues that exist is like muscle. Muscles are made up of, each individual muscles are made up of individual pieces of muscle cells. You do have bone tissue. Let's not get that confused with bone being an organ, though, because bone is considered an organ. We have nervous tissue and even blood. And we'll actually give you the example of how blood is a tissue, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Plants, they're organized that way as well, such as leaves. Leaves would be a tissue. In the internal vascular structure of a plant is considered a tissue, which we don't have to get into all of that anymore. The next one, the next in the order of complication or complexity would be organs. An organ, and if you look at this definition, pretty much it's the same type of definition. An organ is a group of tissues. So you see how it's getting more complicated from it that work together to do specific jobs, such as the heart, lungs, the brain, and even a bone are examples of organs. Remember, the heart, it's not only made up of muscle tissue, it also has blood tissue. It also has connective tissue. It even has nervous tissue. If you've ever heard of like a pacemaker, that's that little electrical, you have your own little electrical nodes inside your heart that actually maintain a heartbeat. And this is those examples for you here. So whenever we take all these different tissues and we give them a singular function to pump blood, well, now we have a heart. And we can sit there and break down the lungs the same way, the brain the same way. And that's what you can expect to see on questions. I might ask you some pretty easy ones that deals with just the complexity of knowing the levels of organizations. But then I'm also going to increase the level a little bit, and I might give you examples of what a description is, and that's what you're going to see a little bit later on. The most complex would be organ systems. This, of course, is a group of organs that work together to carry out a specific life function called the organ system. Great example of this is we could talk about the digestive system. So, of course, we have your mouth, your esophagus, your stomach, your small and large intestines, and even your liver. All of these things have the function to help break down food so that you can absorb nutrients. Well, that's an entire system because those are all different organs, and all those organs are made up of many different types of tissues, and all those tissues are made up of millions of cells. So right here, I give you these two models. These are really common to use to sit there and especially to help understand the complexity part of it. So if you notice on this ring model that I've created, I have a smaller ring in the bottom, that in the middle of it. Well, that would be the simplest. So that would be the cell. And then as we grow in complexity, what would come next? Tissue. And then what? The organ. And lastly, the organ system. So types of questions you might see here is you could have a drag and drop to where you have to put these in the correct order, or I might just have one of these missing with a question mark and say what goes there. Or I might just give you cell and ask you to put the other ones in order. And then you could see something close to the same deal with the bar model as well. The cell, of course, it's on the smallest bar because it is the smallest and least complex. Tissues, organs, and then the organ system itself. And of course, if we take all the organ systems of a living thing put together, we would get an organism. And of course, these levels of organization, what we're talking about, are multicellular organisms. This would not hold true for a bacteria because a bacteria is only a single-celled organism, so it wouldn't have all of these. But multicellular organisms do. So here's an example question. I tell you that blood is a collection of similar cell types of the same origin that travels in a liquid medium called plasma. The collection of the cells helps maintain homeostasis by carrying oxygen to body cells and aiding in the removal of carbon dioxide. Blood has a lot of other jobs as well. But if you notice, what I'm asking you here is, how is blood best described on the levels of organization? Well, I'm going to let you know that just about all of this information is useless. Quite literally, I know the answer to this just by looking at the very first line. It says blood is a collection of similar cell types. As soon as I know that it says cell types, that means it's plural cells. Well, if we go back in our notes, it says that a tissue is a group of similar cells. So right here we're talking about plural cells, so I know that blood then has to be plural cells, which would be a tissue. And so that's what you can expect to see is there's going to be little hints inside of it. There's going to be kind of like a math word problem. You're going to get a lot of other useless information, but there's going to be hints inside of it to sit there and let you know. I could also use some terms that I could have actually told you what these cell parts were called. I could have said white blood cells, red blood cells, platelets, plasma. But if you notice, I said white blood cells, red blood cells. Well, that means we're talking about multiple cells, so multiple cells make tissue. And so that's how you would kind of use the definitions to break this question down in order to answer it. So this right here might look like a complicated picture, but I'll go through it with you. So of course we're talking about the cellular level. The cellular level being the smallest, and then from there making tissues. Tissues, different tissues, we get organs, because right here you see epithelial tissue. That would be like a type of skin tissue. Muscular layers, that would be muscle tissue. And then we get the esophagus, the liver, the stomach, large intestine, small intestines, rectum. Oh, we have the digestive system. And then we take all these systems that we have in our body, and then we make an organism. So that's kind of showing you that. And so one of the last things is talking about cell specialization. We can also refer to this as cell differentiation. And I know those are some big words. So basically, all we're saying is there are a bunch of cells. But not just that there are a bunch of cells, there are a bunch of cells that have completely different functions. We have red blood cells. Well, their function is to sit there and carry oxygen and carbon dioxide. We have white blood cells. That's for your immune system. You have bone cells. We have connective tissue. We're going to have muscle cells. We're going to have nerve cells. Those nerve cells are called neurons. We have skin cells. And the list, there is a lot. Each of these cells has a very specific function, and they are actually shaped, and their structure is built for their function. Now, this last thing, this is why on your guided notes I have this whole part underlined. This means that all cells in your body, they actually all have the exact same DNA, but they don't all use all that information. Different sections of DNA are expressed in order to carry out its specific functions. By that, this is kind of what I mean by it. In the school, if our school was an organism, we have many different types of cells. The basic unit of a school, like teachers. Okay? Now, we have math teachers, we have science teachers, we have history teachers. And if we want to know something, we can go down to the library. Now, because I'm specialized in science, I'm going to sit there and use more of the science section of the library, because that library is that information, that DNA is that information. To do my job, I'm going to really look at those science books, while the history teacher is going to look at the history books more often. We have all the books available to us, but I'm going to stay in my zone, and I'm going to look at mine a lot. Your English teachers are going to look at a lot of literature books to and analyze them. Art books, and so on. Hopefully that example kind of helps you understand what does it mean to be a specialized cell, to have cells that are different from each other even though they have all the same information. So whenever we talk about cell differentiation, like right here, we have different types of cells, and they have different jobs. But remember, inside your body, they all have the exact same DNA in them. And this right here is talking about some of the different types of human body tissue where you find them. Epithelial being skin, skeletal muscle. These would be the muscles that are hooked to your bones to aid with movement. We have connective tissue. That would be like your tendons and ligaments and those fibers. We have nervous tissue, of course, to make up the brain. Cardiac muscle, a different type of muscle for the heart. Smooth muscle as well. And those would be different types of tissues, even though all three of these are muscles. All right. And that is all for Unit 1.